Hey guys, welcome to video number 4 of this series. And this one, what we're going to be doing is adding in guest user checkout capabilities and the ability for a guest user that doesn't have an account with us to build a cart and process their order without ever having to create one. So right now, if we open up our console, make sure that we're logged out. So go through your admin panel or however you have it set up and go ahead and click this add to cart button. And you'll notice that if you follow the code so far, you'll notice that we're going to get this user is not logged in and our cart is not going to have any items in it. So that's what we're going to do in this video, is we're going to take care of all of that. And before I get started, someone mentioned in my last video that it would be good to switch my float field in my product model here. We wanted to switch this to a decimal field, and they mentioned that. I totally spaced out, but it's definitely the right decision when we're talking about dealing with money here. So we're going to switch float field to decimal field. And if you want, which we're not going to switch it right now, we can also switch our email attributes to email field just to have a little bit more customization. But for now, we're just going to do this one right here. So let's start with this. And what I'm going to do is just go to the models and change float field to decimal field. But before we do that, we need to add a few attributes to decimal field. So because decimal field allows us to make a little bit more customizations, what we want to do is set the max digits right here and decimal places. So max digits is going to be the amount of characters that we allow. And in our case, I don't want to limit it to only $999 or whatever that is. So what we want to do is switch that to something like 7. You can change this amount, but the more digits we allow, the higher number we can set our price to. So I just want to make sure that we can have a product that can at least go for a couple $1,000s. And then we also want to add in our decimal places. So this is the places on the right side of that decimal point. So we just want to allow 2. And once we save that, we can quickly run our migration, and then I'll check out the page and make sure everything's working. Okay, so let's open up our console and we'll just turn off our server, and we can run python manage.py, make migrations, and then migrate. Okay, so all the migrations have been run. So I'm going to turn on the server and make sure that everything looks good on our website and that none of those fields in our template were thrown off or anything like that. So we'll just double check it, and then we'll get into part 1, step 1. Okay, so if I refresh this, our prices still look good. So everything ran correctly. So what we want to do now is go to our step-by-step guide here. And this is what we're going to be doing. So we're in module number 4. And we're in part 1, step 1. So we're going to be setting the cookies and creating our cart. So right now, what we're going to be doing here is setting our cookies within our browser here as a key value pair. So we have cart here and we have this object. But right now, the object can only be a string. So what we're going to do is create our cart as a JavaScript object, and then we're going to stringify it, set our cookies, and then every time we want to access that data, we have to parse it and then turn it back into a JavaScript object so we can actually access the value. So we're going to use cookies instead of session storage. So some of you guys might be familiar with that, because we want to actually store the cart once a user logs out. Session storage can only store information when a user is in session, but cookies will actually store that data with that website for however long we need. So we can actually set the expiration date. And this way, whenever a user closes the website and then comes back a couple days later, they can still see their items in cart and then continue their order. So that's the entire effect that we're going for. So that's where cookies will actually allow us to build in that customization. So right now, before we get into part 1 in our module 4 right here, one thing that I wanted to mention is I made a post recently about why a full stack developer, in particular, why a Django developer needs to understand JavaScript. And we are currently at that point where this is the perfect example of why we might need it. I might actually make a post later about this, really going into the details, but at this point, I don't know of any other way to create guest checkout capabilities without JavaScript, and I don't think there is any way to create this, but this is just a perfect example of why you need to know it. And if you really want to become a proficient full stack developer, definitely don't avoid JavaScript. Learn it in its time, but it's definitely useful and it's going to be needed if you want to work on the front end along with everything else in Django. So let's get into step 1. So in step 1, we're going to create our cart. And before we do that, we first want to paste in some code here to parse our cookie. So this function is going to be called getCookie. and it's going to have the sole value of, or the sole responsibility of getting a cookie from our cookies in the browser. So we're going to say get cookie, and then we're going to get this cookie that we set within our browser. So it's going to look for this. And then once we get that, we're going to set json.parse. So it's going to turn it back into a JavaScript object, and then we can actually work with it. So once we parse that data, we're going to go to step 2 where we want to actually set that cookie. And actually we're still in step 1 here. So we have that function, but if we don't have that cookie in our cart, we are going to check if it's undefined. If it is, then we're going to create this object, and we are going to set it with document.cookie. And then this is where we set the key and then the value, and we set it to this domain. So that's what we're going to take care of. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this function right here. And I actually got it from a GitHub repository. I was looking for some functions that can get a cookie and parse it. So I don't know the details of it myself, but what I'll do is leave it in the source code, and I'll also link up this code right here. So if you're following with this guide, we could just get the function right here and copy it. So let's go ahead and get everything from var cart to get cookie. And again, this will be linked up in the description, and I'll probably just paste in the source code. And we're going to open up our main.html file. So I actually think the function we're working with right now is the same as this function right here that I got from the Django docs, but because I wanted to separate things, we're just going to use its own function and call it get cookie. So I'm going to fix this indentation here. And if we take a look at it, the function starts right here, ends right here. And if we don't have a cookie, it's going to return null. If we do, it's going to return that cookie value. So we trigger it right here and set the value to cart. So I'll create that separation, and let's console.log our cookie right now. So, or our cart, and see what we have. So we'll just say cart, and we want to console it out, and let's go to our page. And once I actually show you what's going on here, the next step will make more sense. So I'll refresh it, and we'll just do inspect and open up the console. So right now we're trying to console out our cart, and the value is null. So either null or undefined will work. So if we don't have a cart, what we want to do is at least create one, and we want to do this for an authenticated user or an unauthenticated user. So regardless, we always want to have at least an empty cart for any kind of user. So just between where we console it out and where we set our cart, what we want to do is first check if it's undefined. If the cart is undefined, we want to create one. So we'll just say cart is equal to undefined. And if it is, we're going to take this variable of cart right here, and we're going to set it to a JavaScript object. So remember, if you're coming from Python, this is a dictionary. It's the same thing. We can access key value pairs like we would anything else. So what we're going to do is console.log, and we're just going to say cart was created, and we want to console out the cart itself. Actually, we're consoling out the cart anyways right here regardless, so we'll still see it. So the cart was created, and in order to create the actual cookies, so we set the object, we actually want to set it to our browser's cookies. So to do this, we're going to do document.cookie. And to set the cookie name, we're just going to set a string. And to set the value, we just need to do equals. And we want to concatenate the value. So we're going to do plus. And in theory, we could just do cart, but because this is a cookie right now, the value needs to be a single value and it can't be an object. So what we want to do is turn this into a string, and then later on we'll parse it. So we're going to set json.stringify. And once we have that value stringified, now it's just a key value pair. And the last thing we want to do is make sure that this cookie is set to a single domain. So right now, a cookie will be created for every single page that we're on. So what we want to do is assign the cookie to the main domain of the website. So to do that, we're going to use double quotes here, and we're going to set the domain by just saying domain, and that's going to be equal to path. And for the path, we're just going to set a /. So I want to make sure that's correct. So we have domain, then equals to path /. So that should set it regardless of whatever page we're on. We should always have the same cookie. So let's go ahead and try to refresh that. And there we go. So we consoled out our object. And to actually view the cookies, we can go to application, and we can see right here, we have a cookie named cart, and the value is this string right here, but it's supposed to represent our object. So this is a string value set to our domain, and we have the path. So as we navigate through the website, the cookie will remain the same, And now when we go to our console, because I refreshed the page, we're not going to get this alert that our cookie was created because we already have it. So every time we open up a new page, we're going to check this value. And this time we already had a value for our cart. So we just went ahead and consoled it out. So that's how we set our cookie value. So let's go ahead and go into the next step here. So we created our cart, and now what we want to do is actually add and remove items from our cart. So if we go to our website here and open up cart.js, so that was in our static folder, JS, cart.js, we have this logic for whenever our buttons are clicked, and I'll just go ahead and test that right now actually. So whenever we click this add to cart button, when a user is not logged in, we're just going to see this statement right here that just says not logged in. So what's happening here is whenever a user is authenticated, we call this update user order function, send some data to the backend and add that item. But when a user is not logged in, we're just consoling this out and just saying that, hey, we're not going to do anything. The user's not logged in. So what we want to do is create the function and actually write in the logic and set it within our browser. So if we go to our page here, we first want to create this add cookie item function right here. That's also going to take in the product ID and the action. And then we want to console it out from that function. And then we're going to add some logic to the function itself. So let's first create that, and we'll create that just underneath or just above update user order. So we'll just say function, and I'm going to call this add cookie item. And I always like to camel case this. So add cookie item, the C and the I are capitalized. And we want to get this product ID in action, paste that in as the parameters. And I want to make sure that we console this statement out from the function. So I want to make sure that the function's working, and we're going to replace this console.log with the function that we just created. So instead of consoling out from the statement here, we're going to trigger this function, and I want to create some separation to make sure this is being seen. So let's go ahead and test this first. And I'm going to do a refresh, and you might have to do a Control-Shift-R, so a hard refresh if this is your static file. So let's try that. And then we're going to see not logged in ... And that means that we're now triggering it from our function because of that little change that we made. So now that we have the function, let's go to the next step here and actually create the cart here. So we trigger our cart, and we actually didn't pass the parameters. So let's do that really quick. And I'm going to take in product ID and action and throw those into add cookie item. So we passed in those parameters, and what we want to do now is actually increase and decrease the value of the cart. So we're going to take this action right here. Let me open that up. So we're going to take this action, and we're going to say if the action is add, go ahead and check the cart. So if the cart product ID, if it's not in the cart right now, if it's equal to undefined, go ahead and create it. So set the cart value, set the product ID, set the quantity to 1. And if it's already there, go ahead and increase it. So we're first going to increase the quantity, and then we want to deal with decreasing the quantity or removing the item. So it's the same logic, and we want to write that all within our add cookie item. So remember that whatever button is clicked, the action is either going to be add or remove. And that's how we're going to write our logic. And this is what the cart is going to look like. And I'm going to remove this in a second, but we're trying to create this object right here. So we have the object of cart, and each key right here will be the ID of the product. So as we create it, we're going to set the ID of the product, and then we're going to give it this inner element right here. And we're going to set the key value pair inside as another object. So we're going to nest it, and we're going to give it the quantity and then the quantity value. So let's say the product with the ID of 1 is going to have the quantity of 4, and so on. So let's go ahead and actually create this. And what we're going to do is first write an if statement and then actually set the values. So I want to say if, and we'll create the full statement, and we're going to say if action is equal to add, and that's going to be a string value. We first want to check if the cart has that product ID in it. So right now our cart is an empty dictionary. So we're going to say if, and that is inside our original if statement. And we're going to say cart. So we're able to access the cart because it's in our main.html file. So because it's in that header, we're able to access this element. And we want to say if cart product ID. So we're going to go into the cart and look for this product ID. And we're going to say if that's equal to undefined, let's go ahead and actually create it. So let me fix that really quick. So if the product ID is undefined, so if that element does not exist in the cart, and by the way, that's triple equals right there. We actually don't need to use that. That is something that you can use in JavaScript, but that was a mistake. I'm not going to go into what it is, but that also works. So if the cart is not, or if the item is not in the cart, let's go ahead and set it. And remember, this is very similar to Python. We're going to set that cart key, product ID, and we're gonna create a JavaScript object inside of it. So we're gonna nest it, and we're gonna say quantity, and that's gonna equal to 1. So we added the first element and we set it to 1. Now, if the item already exists in there, that means the quantity is already set to 1. We just wanna get the current value of that item and add to it. So we're gonna say quantity or cart ID. So we're gonna query the product ID, and then we're gonna go for the quantity of that item. And we're gonna go ahead and add 1 to that. So I hope all this makes sense, because now what we need to do is decrease the value or the quantity of an item if that down arrow is clicked in our cart page. So when a user starts adjusting the quantity, we wanna create another condition, and it's gonna be similar to this statement. So still within our function, but outside of our first if statement, we wanna create another one. And this one is gonna be if action is equal to remove. What we want to do is decrease the quantity of the product. So we know it exists because the down arrow was clicked, so that means the product is in our cart. We want to get the product by ID, and we want to set the quantity to minus equals and decrease the value of 1. So we're going to decrease the value, but if that value is less than 1, so if we're at 0, we want to completely remove the item from our cart. So to do that, we're going to write another conditional, and we're going to say if the product quantity is less than or equal to 0, go ahead and delete it. So we'll create the if statement, and we're gonna query the cart by product ID, and we're gonna take this quantity right here, and we're gonna say if this is less than or equal to 0, now we should delete the product. So I wanna console this out, so console.log, and we'll just say remove item. And we can remove the item by simply using the delete method. So this is a JavaScript method, and we're gonna get the product and go for the product ID here. So we're gonna get the cart, access the key, and just say delete this key from our cart, which will also remove the nested elements from it. So we decrease it or delete it, and we also have the add method. So let's go ahead and actually update the cookies. So right now we got our cart from our cookies right here. We parsed it, we turned it into a JavaScript object. We manipulated it, so we updated it or removed items from it. And now what we want to do is set the cookies so the page can reload and the user can actually leave the page without losing any information. So we update the object, and after our second if statement, so still within the function, I just copied this right here. So document.cookie.cart. So we're just going to override whatever our cookies have set for the cart. So we're going to take that current method, we're going to take our updated object right here, and we're going to set that again to that same path. So I want to quickly console the cart out and then show you what it looks like in the console and within the cookies. So we'll just console out the cart itself, and I need to make sure that's a plus equals, not just plus. I'll save that. We're consoling out our cart, and then we're setting the cookies to that domain. And if I go to my browser here, let's refresh, and we'll just do add to cart. And we see an item in our cart right now. So let's go ahead and analyze what's going on here. So as we add an item, we have the item ID and we have the quantity set. So we created the first item. If we click it again, we're going to have the same item, and we updated the quantity. So we can keep updating that. And if we want to add another item, so let's go to this watch right here. That watch has the ID of 4 and the quantity is 1. So what's happening here is this is the object that we're actually consoling out, but the data is actually stored within our cookies. So if we go to application, and I'm using Google Chrome, so I'm not sure how it's going to look in other browsers, but we have our cookies, and if we go to our cart, there's our object set as a string. So we have that string value, and on each time we click that, we reset that value and then parse that data and then start working with it. So right now what I'm going to do is quickly just reload the page so we can actually see the items being updated, and then we'll build out the cart on the back end. And this isn't the best way to do this. This is where having some kind of REST API built out, or just using more JavaScript would help. But what I want to do is make sure that we can see our total be updated on each page. So I want to build a cart, and then I want to reload the page, which we can do with location.reload. It's just going to reload our website. And right now, when I update the cart here, so let's go ahead and try this. I'll update it. You'll notice the website reloads, but nothing here updates. So that's why we're reloading it, because we're going to go to the backend right now, and we're going to get this data. So let's go to part 2. We're going to get this data and render out the total within our cart. So we're going to see this total update, and all that data is going to be built out within our views. So let me try to explain what's going on here right now. At this point, we simply update our browser's cookies, and then we refresh the page. And whenever we refresh the page, we get to call our views again. And within our views, we're going to update this get_cart total value and pass it into our context dictionary. And when we do that, we get to call that within our navigation bar. So let me go ahead and just open that up here. And I'm going to close out main.html, move cart.js to the right, and we'll open up views.py. So all of the logic we're going to write is going to be within cart view, but eventually we'll move it into checkout and store. And for now, what we want to do is first query the cart, and then we're going to get the values of cart, and we're going to update get cart total. Before, we got cart items from that order object, and we just queried the method. But at this point, we have it set to 0, and what we want to do is update this value based on whatever is in our cookies. So we can get our cookies with request.cookies, and then getting the cookie name. So our cookie name was cart, and we're going to set this to the variable of cart. So once we have that, remember our cookies are a string right now. So we need to parse this, and then we'll print it out. So we'll do JSON.loads, and this will parse it, turn it back into a Python dictionary, and we want to print that out. So once we print it, we'll check our console, and then make sure everything's working right, and then we'll actually start looping through it. So we have our cart, and remember this is in the cart view, so we have to open up that page to see it. We'll go to cart, and in our console, there we go. So we have cart, we see the ID, the quantity, and then the ID of the second item with the quantity. So before we start updating this cart total, I want to show you something that a user will run into on their first load, because when we first load our page, we don't have this cart value. So it's going to cause an error. So we need to fix this. And I'll show you what I mean by this. So if we go to application, and if we clear out our cookies, so I'm going to go to cart here, delete it. And now if we refresh our page, we're going to see this error, and then we're going to fix it. So right now we're looking for that cookie called cart. We can't find it. So it causes an error. And right now, if we don't have a cookie called cart, we want to just go ahead and create a dummy value until it gets set. So remember, this gets set in main.html. So that's why we don't have it yet. So if we just add in some dummy information right now, it'll fix that temporary bug, and then it'll get set once the page is loaded. So right now, if we don't have that cookie, we're going to create an object here, and it's going to be empty or a dictionary, and it should fix that problem for us. Okay, so now on first load, it's not going to be a problem, but the cart is set because we loaded the website, and we want to loop through this cart right now and update cart items. Remember that we can loop through a Python dictionary just like we would a list, except for on each iteration, we're going to get the key. And in this case, the key is going to be the product ID. So we're going to access it this way, get the quantity, and increment cart items on each iteration. So let's write that, and we can do that just underneath cart items here. And we're going to say for I in cart, not cart items. And we're going to say cart items is going to be, we're going to add to it. So plus equals, and then we're going to index the cart, get the ID on that iteration, and pass in the quantity. So once we have the quantity, we update cart items, it gets thrown into the context dictionary, and we'll see that cart icon update in that navigation bar, but only for the cart page. So right now we only did it in this view. Eventually it'll be passed into all of them. So let's go ahead and refresh that, make sure it's working. So in our main page, we're not going to see it, but if we go to our cart page, there we go, we see our total. So right now, if we add a few more products, we won't see it update here, but now in cart, we can see it. So we're updating that. The next thing we want to do is actually start building out the order. So let's go to part 3 in module 4. And in here, what we're going to do is actually continue this loop right here. And we're going to start adding to our order dictionary that we have set up in our view. So if I open up this image right here, we're going to continue this loop, and then we're going to start querying the products, setting the totals, and updating these values right here. So get cart total is going to be a representation of what a real order should look like. We haven't created anything in the database yet, but we're going to start rendering this information out and building it. So let's go back to our view here and start that. So the first thing I want to do is query the product, because this is where we need to get the values like price and all the other values that a product contains. And we're going to do product.objects.get, and then we can get the ID by the iteration here. So ID is going to equal to I, because we are looping through and getting the keys, and all those keys are the product ID. So now we can get the total here, and the total I'm going to put into parentheses here, and that is going to be product.price. Remember, we queried the product, so now we can actually access it, and we're going to multiply that by the quantity. So we're going to get car I quantity, and this is the product ID, the quantity. So we're going to get that value, set the total, and we can update our actual order dictionary here. So now that we have the order dictionary, the first thing we're going to update is get cart total, and we're going to pass that in here, and we're going to increment it. So plus equals, and we're going to throw in the total on each iteration. So we're going to get the total of each item, and we're going to update the total of the entire order. So once the total is updated, we can do the same for the actual items. So we're going to get the cart items here, and in this case, we're going to take the quantity of each item in the cart and add that to our total. So these totals are now updated, and this order object is now passed in through our context dictionary, just like it was for a logged in user. So what I can do now is go to my cart page and make sure that these totals are updated. So if I refresh this, now we see our totals. Remember, these items are not in the database yet, and we just made a representation of what an actual order might look like based off of these key value pairs. So we took in these IDs and these quantities and passed in this data and actually created something that looks like a real order. So that's pretty cool. The next thing we need to do is build out the items in our cart. So these items right now, before we actually created a query set, so we go by the order, get the actual items in the database, query them. But for a guest user, we need to take in this empty items list right here, and we need to do the same thing. We need to create a dictionary representation of an actual order item, and then append it to this list, and then we can actually throw that into the template and then use those same items. So let's go ahead and start that, and we're going to create a variable called item, and we're just going to set that to an empty dictionary for now. And if I go back to my guide here, what we're trying to do is turn this data right here where we just have an ID and the quantity, and we want to output it like this. So because we don't have the real items, what we're going to do is build it in this loop, just like we did with that order. And in this case, what we're going to do is create this dictionary, and we need to first nest the product. So remember that in our template, if we go to cart.html, we need to query up the item and the product information. So right here in our loop, we do things like product.price, product.name, and so on. So we need to make sure we can keep that format in our template without having to write something different. So we have product, and that's nested in here. So that's the first attribute of item. And the second attribute of item is quantity and get total. So we're going to nest product with the values here and then the item attributes. So the output is going to look something like this right here. So this is what it's going to look like when it's in JSON format or a Python dictionary. But we're going to have all these values, and for now we're just going to ignore the ID. I don't think we need it there, and we're also going to ignore digital. That's something I built in earlier, and we'll just see if we need it later. But we have our product here, and this is what the values are going to look like and the full output. So let's go ahead and start building that. And if I go back to step 2, we want to continue with our product. So let's start working on the product here. So I'll create some space here, and that's going to be our first attribute. So we have product. That's going to be a string for now, and product is going to be its own object here. So after that, I'm going to put in a comma there. And for product, the first value we need is going to be the ID. So we're going to set the ID, and we're going to get that by doing product.id. Remember that we have it right here. So we're just going to query up to that. And then we need the name. So name, that's going to be product.name. And the last thing we need to do is add price and the image URL. Okay, so we have the product attribute set, so we have a nested object within it, and I need to make sure that's a comma, and I can probably actually fix that indentation. And the next attribute for item after product is going to be quantity and then get total. So let's set quantity, and the quantity value is going to be what we set right here. So we're going to index cart right there and just get the quantity, and then we can get the total by just doing get underscore total, and we already set that right here. So we'll just pass that in, and the last thing we need to do is append this item to this items list right here. So we'll just space that, make sure that's within the loop, and we're going to do items dot append, and we'll just throw in this dictionary. So I'll make sure the indentation is correct here. We'll fix a few things, and everything is looking good. So once I save this and go to our cart, we should see these items actually being output here. So let's refresh that, and there we go. So we just built out a cart and the actual items in it without actually having to store this information in our database. So if we go back to our cart.html page or just the cart page, we should be able to click these values right here and actually see everything get updated, including that cart icon. And we should be able to remove items by going below 0 and see our items be removed. So if everything worked correctly in cart.js, you should have this full functionality and be able to update the cart without actually updating the database. And in the next step, what we want to do is add in some logic here. So whenever we go to this page, we're able to change the status of shipping and render out our shipping form if needed and hide it if we don't need it. So right now, everything is done within our cart view, but eventually we're going to repeat all of this code for all of these views here, and we're going to clean it up. So it's going to get a little bit messy, and then we'll fix it. So let's go to step number 3, I believe here. So step 3, all we want to do is continue that loop and update the order dictionary shipping value to true if the product is not digital. So it's a simple condition here, and we can write this within our view just underneath items right here. So still in the loop right here, what we're going to do is check the product. So we're going to say if product.digital, if digital is equal to false. So if the product is a physical product, what we want to do is go ahead and set the shipping status to true. So if product is false, we're going to take this order shipping status right here. So from this order dictionary, and we can throw that, let's put a colon right there. So we'll throw that in right there, and we'll just say shipping is equal to true. So yes, this product needs to be shipped. And remember, this is for our checkout page, but for now we're writing it in here. And the last thing we want to do, which I listed in step number 4 here, is we want to make sure that the product that we're querying right here does actually exist in our database. So a user can add these products to their cart, but remember that is being stored within our cookies. So at the moment, it's just being stored there, but once they actually try to get those products, if that product for some reason is removed from our database, we're going to get an error. So we don't want the user seeing that error. We just want to go ahead and ignore it and not add that item to our cart. So let me show you what I mean by that. And if I go to my website here again, I'm going to go ahead and log in. So remember, right now we're a guest user. I'm going to log in right now, create a different item. We're going to add it to the cart, and then we're going to remove it, and you'll see the error that occurs. So if I go to products here, we're going to create a random product, and I probably won't even set an image to it, but we're just going to say random, and the price is going to be $1, and we'll save that. So now if I go ahead and log out, if I go to my cart here, we're going to see this random product right here. We're going to add it to cart, and we're going to be able to view it within our cart. So it doesn't have an image, nothing's happening. But what happens if that item is removed from the database? So I'll log back in, and then we're going to remove it. So we'll go to products here, and we want to remove random. So we're just going to delete this. Let's actually go to the product here, delete it, and confirm that. So now when we log out as a guest user, what's going to happen here is when we load this page, our view here is going to try to query this product, and it's going to cause an error. So if I refresh it, we're going to get this error, and it's going to say the product does not exist. So we just want to create a temporary fix for that. And what we want to do is write a try catch except, or try and except here. And we just want to say that if something goes wrong here, we just want to ignore it and not break the cart. So it's kind of like what we did for our cookies in our store view. Actually, no, it was in this view. Kind of like what we did right here. We just want to make sure that the error doesn't occur, and we can close off except right here. So for now, we'll just do pass, and we shouldn't get an error. So now if I refresh the page, we should see our cart, but just without the product. So we might need to give this a second. Let's make sure everything's working correct. And we'll hit refresh. So now when we're going into our cart, we're only seeing that one product and we're not getting the error. So it was happening because when we go to inspect element, we have that product ID in our cart. So that ID is still within our cookies. So we're looking for the product with the ID of 7. We go to our database, we try to find it. Because it's not there, and we wrote that try catch or try accept block, it's not throwing the error, but the product is still within the user's cart. So there's different things we can do with fixing this, but we're not gonna go into that right now. And we're just gonna create a simple fix. So what we're gonna do now is go to the next step and clean up a lot of our code here. So remember, we need to repeat all this code within all of our views here. So we wanna make sure that our cart total is available in all the navigation bars. All of the product data is available. So for example, everything within our cart also needs to be available within our checkout page. So what we're gonna do is create a file called utils.py. And what we're gonna do here is create one function, and we're gonna call that cookieCart. And this function is gonna be in charge of storing all this logic right here for a guest user. So everything after this else statement within cart, we're gonna take all this logic, put it into that function, and then put it into all these other views. So if you go back to our picture here, cookieCart is simply gonna be triggered within all these views, and now we're not gonna have to repeat our code. So we're gonna follow the concept of DRY, which stands for don't repeat yourself. So in programming, anytime we wanna create something and we need to use that same logic multiple times, we don't wanna have to rewrite it. So it's all gonna be stored within that function. So let's go ahead and start at step 1 here. And within step 1, we're gonna create that utils.py file. We're gonna create that function called cookieCart, which for now is just gonna return back a dictionary, and it's gonna take in the parameter of request. And once we do that, we want to import that function into our views. So we wanna go ahead and import cookieCart and then any other functions that we add to it. So let's go ahead and go into our project, and within our store app, we wanna create that file, and I'm gonna save it as utils.py. And the first thing we wanna do is import JSON, and we wanna import our models. So I'm gonna copy that from my views. And we also wanna do from.models. We need full access to these. So we're gonna do from.models, import, and we wanna import all of them. So we're gonna do star. And we can do this because we are still within the same file path right here as models.py. And we wanna create that function. So cookie, and then cart is gonna be with a capital C. And we're gonna throw in the request. And we just wanna return back a dictionary. So return, we'll throw that in for now. And to make this cart available within our views.py file, we can just do from.utils import, and we're gonna import that new function. So cookieCart. So we import the function, we just created it. We'll save both of those, make sure that we don't have any errors. So everything looks good so far, and we can go to step 2, which in step 2, we're just gonna take all the logic from this else statement, and we wanna paste it into our cookieCart function. Once we paste it in here, we wanna return cart items, order, and items here. So we wanna return those, and we're gonna have full access to those values once we throw those in. So let's go to our cart view right here. So we're gonna take everything from else here. So we're gonna grab everything from try, and then down to pass, and that's all the logic we need. So we'll take that and we'll paste that in here, and I'm gonna make sure all the indentation is fixed. So that should be backspaced, and then except should be back here. And let's go ahead and take all of this and tab it backwards. So I just wanna make sure that our first try catch looks good, and then this one also needs to be indented right there from cart, and we need to create that separation. So try except, and then we go through this print statement. We have our loop, everything is within the loop. The try catch looks good, and we have pass. So let's pass in the parameters and make sure I have everything. So cart item, order, and item. So cart items, I'll throw in right here. And then we're gonna get that from, so that's the value. So we're taking cart items, passing it in, and then our order. So order, that's just gonna be the order dictionary we created, which is right here. And then our items list. So we're taking this list, which we created right here, and we're gonna throw that in. Okay, so we created the function, we added the logic to it, and we can go to the next step. So the next step, what we want to do is actually use this cookie cart view. So if I go to this image right here, we have our if statement and then our else statement. What we're going to do is set this variable of cookie data to the return value of this cookie cart function. So we pass in request right here because we still want to have access to things like request.cookies and any other request values within our utils.py file. So that's what we pass it in here. And this is not a view. It looks like it because we're throwing that in and that's what we're familiar with, but we're just throwing that in and we can access the values because we set the return value of cart items, order, and items right here. So remember, we still need to pass these into our context dictionary. So what we're gonna do is set the return values and we can get those because of what we set up right here. So actually that's our views. So we can get those because we set them up here and then we can access them whenever the return value of cookie data is set to cookie cart. So we access them this way, we pass them in, and we want to repeat this step for our store view, for our cart view, and our checkout view. So we're gonna clean up all this logic, and then once we refresh our checkout page and all the other pages, we should see that cart total in our in this icon right here. So in our cart icon, we should see that, and then in our checkout page, we should also see all the data in here because we're gonna use that same logic on every page. So let's take this, and we also imported it right here, so we have access to it. So I'm gonna take cookie cart, and we're gonna start by cleaning up our cart view. So everything after else here, we're just gonna delete it right now. So we can delete all of that. Our else statement, it looks clean now. And we're gonna say cookie data, and that's gonna be with a capital D, and we're gonna throw in cookie cart. So now cookie data is gonna be this dictionary value. So that's gonna be the value of cookie data. And I just realized we spelled cart items wrong here. So I'll save that. And I'm actually gonna move utils.py to the right here so we can see both at the same time. So cookie data now has this return value, and we also need to throw in request here before I forget that. So what we can do now is set cart items, and we're gonna set that to the value of cookie data. So we have cookie data, and we can index it because it's a dictionary. So we can index this value right here, and we're gonna throw in this string. So we index cart items or cookie data, and we get cart items out of that. And then we're gonna repeat this for our order. So we're gonna set order to order right there. And then finally, we can just get our items. So we're gonna take these right here and we'll set the variable and index the value. So once we have that, we save it. We have the new values here that we throw into the context dictionary, and I can save that and refresh our cart page. So let's go ahead and make sure everything's working correctly. And it looks good. So now we're running off of that function. And if we go to checkout, let's go ahead and throw the same values into checkout. So we'll take cookie data right here and all the way to items. We need the same exact values here. So we can just remove everything after the else statement in checkout view. And we throw in cart items, we throw in the order and the items themselves. So remember, we're also throwing in cart items right here into the navigation bar. So we'll see this get updated and all that data being output here. Okay, perfect. So the function's doing exactly what it needs to do. The shipping value is being updated, the actual items are being rendered, and now we're seeing this in our cart icon, and we need to do the same for our store view. So right now in our store view, the only thing we need is going to be this cart icon right here. So we can take cookie data and only pass in cart items. Remember, because it's a function, we can access only what we need right now. So we can just take cart items and we don't need order or items themselves. So I actually showed that in my instructions within our store view, but we don't need those items. So there's no need to repeat ourselves. And if I save that, we should see that nav bar update and see the total update right here. Perfect. So now we see the total. I'll try to zoom in here. So we're seeing the count at 7 right now, and everything is looking good. So we just cleaned everything up, and our code is going to be, we're actually going to do a lot more than this. We're going to take all this logic eventually and put it inside another function within utils.py. So by the time we're done with this, our views file is actually going to be pretty clean. I just wanted to go through this process so you can see exactly how I go about thinking about this and how I eventually start cleaning things up. So we are done with part 4, and we can go to part 5 where we are going to create our cartData function. So we've cleaned up our code a lot, but we want to do a little bit more here, and we can always make things better. So what I want to do now is get all of this logic right here. So we have our cookie cart, everything that we just created, we want to take everything from this if and else statement and throw that into utils.py. So we're going to create all this logic within utils.py inside of this function called cartData. And once we create that function, what we're going to have here is, if I go to step 3, this is what our output is going to look like. So instead of the logic that we have right now where we've cleaned it up and you see these statements right here, so if, else, in all of our views here, we want our views to look more like this right here. So we want to be able to have one value here that sets the return value of cart data, and we want to throw that into this variable called data. And from there, we want to be able to just access cart items, order, and items. Now, cart data is going to take care of that if else statement and handle all of that logic for logged in users and unauthenticated users. So it's going to take care of all of that for us. We don't want to have to think about that. We can just get the return values after we set that, and it'll clean up our code a lot more. So let's go ahead and start at step 1 here. And in step 1, we want to add this function called cartData in our utils.py file. And then we just want to return back this dictionary. So let's start with that. And within utils.py, we're just going to move this to the left here. We're going to create this just underneath cookieCart. So we're going to set the function and we're going to call it cartData. And that is going to be with a capital D. And this is also going to take in the request because we want to be able to access request.user and any other values like that. So we'll set request and we'll set the return value. And that'll just be that dictionary. And we can go to the next step. So we have our function, and really quick, we'll just import our function in here. So we have cookieCart. We want to be able to access cart data too. So we'll throw that in and we can go to step number 2. So what we want to do now is get all of this logic from all of our views and throw this into our cart data function. Once we have that, we just want to return these values just like we did with cookieCart. And then we're going to start using this in our view. So we'll start with our checkout view. And in our checkout view, we're just going to take everything from if and the end of else, and we're going to paste that into this cart data function, make sure the indentation is correct. And we can grab this return value right here and just throw that in there. So we're going to copy and paste it, and we have access to cookieCart. So we're going to start calling it within here, and we have access to it because we're in the same file here. So by the time we're done with this, we're no longer going to use cookieCart within our views, but within our cart data function. So let's go ahead and move to the next step. Now that we moved all of the logic, we can go to step 3 and actually start using this. So what we're going to do is replace how we have our view set up to use the value of data and call the cart data function. So I'm going to close this out, and we can use cart data because we imported it right here. So just after cookieCart, and we're going to start with our checkout page. So let's go to our checkout page and remove everything from if to else, and we'll just backspace this, and we want to change the name of our cookie data to just data. So this is going to be data, and we want to call the cart data function. So we call the function, we pass in a request, and now instead of cookie data, we need to access the data variable, and the value should be the same because we are returning the same thing that we returned with cookie data. So our view now has the logic within our function. We access the data, and now if I save it and refresh it, our checkout page should still see the same information. So if I go to our checkout page, everything's working fine, but now we are triggering the cart data function and everything's much more clean. So let's go ahead and just repeat this for our cart view. So I'm going to paste that in right here. So we have data, we're accessing cart items, order, and items, and we're going to do the same for our store view. So in store, we only need to access cart items here. So we'll just paste that in, and we can remove order and items. And there we go. So look how much cleaner our views are. We really simplified things by writing our logic in here, and now we're not repeating ourselves. So let's make sure everything's working, and I'll refresh the page again, and then we'll go back to our store page and our cart. So try that one more time. So it looks good here. Our cart page looks good. We see all our values, and now our store is looking good. So we see that in the navigation bar. Our views are much cleaner. So we're done with part 5, and now we can move on to part 6. So this is the last part in this module. What we're going to do now is finish that checkout process before we go to module number 5 and actually implement the payment integration. So part 6 consists of 4 steps here. We're first going to clear our cookies whenever that checkout button is clicked on our checkout page. We want to clear that, set the value to an empty cart, and then we're actually going to process the logic on the back end and let a user actually place an order and add it to the database. So let's go to step 1 here. And within our checkout.html page, on the bottom of the page where we have our JavaScript, we have this function right here where we have our submit form data function, and within the promise, whenever that function processes the data or sends it to the backend, right now we just create this alert and that says transaction is complete, and then we send the user back to the home page. So what we want to do right now is take our cart variable, the one that was set in main.html. We want to set that to an empty dictionary. So if we have any information in there, we're going to clear it, and then we're going to set our cookies. So we're going to reset our cookies to this empty dictionary, and we're going to do this regardless of whether the user is logged in or not. It doesn't change anything if the user is logged in. So let's go ahead and go to this code block, and I'm going to copy this code. So if you have this guide, you can just copy this. And if you don't, you can just go to main.html and take that code or just write it out as I have it. So it's in main.html where we set our cookies, but for now, we're going to go to this promise right here. And before we redirect our user, I want to go ahead and clear our cookies. So we're going to set the value of cart to an empty object here, and we're going to do document.cookie. We're going to set the value of cart to this new cart that we created, and then we're going to set it to our root domain. So let's go ahead and test that. And I'm going to go back to my cart page here, go to checkout, and let's fill out this information. So remember, we are not logged in right now, and I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. We're going to get this payment button. And remember, when we click payment button or make payment, we're going to trigger this function right here. So submit form data is going to get triggered. And then once that data is sent, we're going to clear our cart. So let's try that. We'll submit that, hit OK. And once we're redirected, our cart is now clear and none of the elements are there. So we reset our cookies here. And what we want to do now is actually process this data. So nothing was actually added to the database at this point. So let's go ahead and go to the next step and actually start working with that. So we're going to go to our view here. And within our process order view, this is where we're going to complete the logic here for our guest user. So right now, we check if the user is authenticated. If they are, we process all their information, create the order. If they're not, we're just printing out the user is not logged in. So in this step, what we're going to do is work with this data value here. So we're going to take all the form data sent from that guest user, and then we are going to start setting these values. So we're going to set the name of the user, their email, and then we are still going to use the cookieCart function. So I guess I forgot about this. We're still going to use it. So make sure it's in your views. And we're going to use this to get the data and create that cart for our guest user. Once we create it and we have that in a dictionary, we're going to set the items and then actually loop through those and create this user in our database and create the order along with the order item. So let's go ahead and get started with that. And we can do that by going to our process order view. And here is the logic for an authenticated user. And we want to start right here. So let's first print out the cookies, and we'll see this once we actually send some data. So let's just say cookies, and we can access these by doing request.cookies and all caps. And then we want to get the name and the email. So name is going to be set to data. And then we first need to get the form. So we're going to say form, and then we need to chain that. And then we're going to say name. So now we just need to get the user's email, and we'll set that value, and we can repeat this right here. We're going to go data.form or data form. And in this case, we're going to throw in the email. And now that we have this, we want to be able to get the cart data. So we're going to set cookie data just like we did in the views before we switched everything to cart data. And we are going to access the cookie data function. So let me move checkout.html to the left here, and we'll open up our utils.py. So we're going to use cookieCart. And remember, within cookieCart, we create that order and we create that list of items and we return them. So they're a dictionary representation of what a database item might actually look like. So we're going to get those values, and then we're actually going to create them and save them into the database. So they're real values along with the user and the full order. So we have cookie data with our cookieCart. We passed in request, and we can get those items by just accessing the cookie data value here. So remember, we just set that. So we can say cookie data and we get the items. And now we want to create our customer. So for the customer, we're going to use that get or create method. So we're going to set the value of customer, and then we need to use created here. And remember, we used this earlier, so you should be familiar with this. And we just need to do customer.objects.get _or create. So this is going to be kind of cool. Right now, if we have a guest user that wants to shop a few times on our website, but they never create an account, we don't have to create a new user each time that person checks out. So if they use the same email, what we're going to do is look for this email. And if that email exists, we're just going to attach them to that customer, but they still don't have an account with us. They're just listed as a customer, but at least we're attaching them and we're able to actually still access their old values. So we can see how many times a guest user has shopped with us. And if this customer ever wants to create an account, this way their account doesn't get reset. They can create an account and we can attach all of their previous orders before they're ever a user with us and still see all their previous orders. So that way we're able to actually trace certain user behavior and not have to create multiple accounts here. And for this user, once we create them or find them, we also want to set their name value. So we want to say customer.name, and we're going to set this name value to the name variable here. So we're going to take that data from the form and set it. So if the email is the same, we'll still use that customer, but if they decide to change their name, that's why we want to set these values outside of that create method. So we're going to say customer.save. And that's it for the customer. And now we want to create our order. So for order, we're just going to use the simple create method. We're just going to say order.objects.create. And we're going to set the values to this new customer right here. And we're going to set the status of complete to false until the payment processing has actually went through. So we're going to set the variable or the attribute of customer. And this is going to be that new customer we found or created. And we want to set the status of complete to false. So we'll set complete is equal to false here. And now what we need to do is loop through all of these items right here. Remember, it's just a list of dictionaries right now. And we need to actually add these items to the database and create them and then attach them to this order object that we just created. So let's go ahead and start this loop. And we're going to say for item in items. And in this loop, what we first need to do is query the product, because we need to attach, if we go to our models.py file, in models.py, we need to attach an order item to a product right here. So it has to be connected to a product and to an order. So we're first going to create that, and we're going to say product is equal to product.objects.get, and we want to get this by the ID, and we can do that by accessing this item dictionary right here on each iteration. And from item, we need to get the product value. And then from that product, we actually need to get the product ID. So let me show you what I mean by this. If we open up our utils.py file, when we set this, we created this item and the first attribute was product. So we got product here and now we're chaining it up. So we're just getting that product ID. So that's what we're doing right here. So we have the open and close, the open and close. So we're actually going to the item above us and getting that product ID. So once we have that set, we need to create the order item. So I'm going to create a variable called order item. And this is going to be with a lowercase o right here and a capital I. And then we're actually going to create the order item object. So the model. And in this case, we're going to have a capital O and a capital I. So that's actually the model there. So don't get confused there. And we're just going to say order item.objects.create. And with this, on each iteration, we're going to create an order item and we're going to attach it to this product. So if we go to our model here, we see that we have the attribute of product and order. So we want to set both of those. And we can just say product is equal to product. And that was the product we queried. And we also want to attach it to this order right here. So we're going to set order, and that's going to be equal to that order object. So the last thing we want to do is get the quantity. And quantity is just going to be set to item. And we're going to get this quantity attribute here. So just go back to our utils.py file. And when we created that object, we have our quantity right there. So we set it. And now on each iteration, we are creating a new order item. So the next thing we want to do is within the same step here, we want to, after we create everything, we want to fix some indentation here. So we need to access this total right here, all the way down to order save underneath our else statement. So before we created this whenever a user was authenticated, but now that the unauthenticated user also has a customer value and an order value, we need to make sure that regardless of whoever is checking out, this value can still be accessed right here and saved. So let me just try to go through that as slow as possible, and then I'll try to explain as I go. So if we scroll up right here, we need to get everything from total to order save. And I'm gonna expand this. And what I just did is I copied that. So let's copy it again. Let's remove it. And we have our first if statement. So I'm gonna shrink that. And then we have our else statement. So this is for the guest user. So I'm also gonna minimize that. And after the guest user, we can go ahead and paste everything within or after our else statement. So if I fix this indentation, we have our if statement, else statement, and then regardless of whoever is checking out, we still need to confirm the total, make sure everything's working correct, and we have an order object for both values. So our authenticated user has an order and our guest user also has an order. So that's what we're doing here. We're just confirming a few values. One thing I missed is we also need to get the shipping object right here. So if the order.shipping status is true, we want to create the shipping instance and also set those values. And we just access data, shipping address, and all that is also available before the condition here. So let's copy this and remove it from this condition. And we'll also minimize else right there. And we're gonna paste this just underneath our order.save method. So I'll just make sure this indentation is fixed. And at this point, everything looks good. We have both conditions for a logged in user and an unauthenticated user. And what we wanna do next is actually do a little bit of what we did with our utils.py file, where we put all this logic within a function inside here, and we are gonna create a checkout option for our else statement. So we wanna take all this logic right here and put this into a function that can just be triggered right here, so we don't have to write this conditional in our views and make our views look all messy like this. So let's go to our steps here, and I'm gonna shrink this picture, and that is within step number 3. So in step 3, we wanna check out, or we wanna create this guest checkout function. So we're gonna call this guest order, and within guest order, we're just gonna return an empty string for now, and we're gonna just take in request and data. So we wanna take in the data value here, so anything set right here, we wanna make sure that this is available whenever we call our else statement, because this value is now gonna be within that function. So after we create the function here, we're just gonna copy and paste all of that logic into our guest order view, and then we're gonna return back our customer and our order. And once we get that value back, then we can simply go ahead and just grab that order, return it, and then we can add in the logic here. So let's just go ahead and start writing that in. So within our utils.py, we're gonna create guest order, so create that as a function. And I always camel case it, so guest order, and it's gonna take in data and request. And I just wanna make sure that I'm putting that in the right order here. So if I scroll up here, we have request and data. So I just want to flip those around and throw in request first. So it's request, data, and then at this point, we're just going to return back the empty string. So we're just going to throw in that string, and we want to call guest order within our view. So we want to make sure that we can import that. So we're just going to do comma after cartData. And let's grab all of the logic from our if statement or else statement and paste that into our guest order. So everything within else here. So let's take everything from print down to this loop, and we're just going to remove it. So there should be nothing in there, and we want to paste that in right here. So let's fix the indentation, and I'm going to move that so we can see it better. And I'm just going to tab it back. So we have all the logic, the indentation looks good. And now we want to return this order because we need to access it right here. So let's pass in the order and customer. And let's also make sure that that formatting is right. So we actually need customer before order. I keep messing those things up right now. So let's just throw in order after customer. So I'll remove that and add a comma. And now that we have that, we can call guest order within that conditional. So remember that we have our customer first and our order. So within our else statement, we can just say customer, comma, order, and we can trigger that function here. And we need to set the equals to symbol, and we need to pass in data. So remember, data goes in here. Now it's available in here. And we also need to pass in request, and that was before data. So now all of this logic is available within our view here. So we can trigger our order, trigger our customer, and get all those values. So at this point, the last thing we need to do is just test this and make sure it's all working. So let's go ahead and open up our admin panel. Let's see what we have so we can see a new order get created, and then we'll log out and we'll make a purchase as a guest customer, and we'll just see if everything's being added correctly. So at this point, our order, we only have 2. We have an order with the ID of 1 and 3, and customers in our database, looks like we just have 1 customer, and that's me. So let's go ahead and go through this process and check out. So I'm logged out, and if I refresh the page, we're having a guest cart here. So that's an unauthenticated user. If we go to our checkout page, let's go ahead and create a new customer. So I'm just gonna say new user. So new user, and then the email is gonna be newuser@gmail.com. And let's just throw in another shipping address. We'll go to continue, and I'm gonna open up my command prompt so we can see any issues if they come up. And we need to make the payment, transaction completed. And so far, it looks like everything's good. Let's log in and make sure that that order and customer were added. So if we go back to the admin panel, let's log in as a super admin. And the customer should have been created without a user at this point because they never created an account. So there we go, we created the customer. So that means all the logic within here so far within guest order, this is working. So it looks like we created the customer, we attached the email, and we need to make sure that the order was created. So we have our orders. It looks like we have our order with the ID of 4. We created the transaction ID. So far so good. The status is complete, and we need to go to our order items. So we need to see order items with the ID of 4. So there we go. We have the order item with the order ID of 4. So it's connected to that order, and we have the quantity of 4. So everything went well. Our guest checkout's working. Our authenticated user logic is working. So right now, all we have to do is add in the payment integration, and that's going to be done within the next module. And then I'm going to add some bonus features to this. So in module 5, we're going to add in payment integration so a user can actually use PayPal to check out in this process, because right now we're checking out without actually making a payment. So I'll see you guys in the next video.